Mr. President, Washington, D.C. has an addiction problem. Washington, D.C. is addicted to spending. Washington, D.C. is addicted to debt. This budget deal takes a giant step backwards. Instead of shrinking government, it grows government by 13%. In fact, it is the largest spending increase since 2009, the first year President Obama was in office. You know, I spent 28 years in the private sector before I came to Capitol Hill. I was expected to produce a balanced budget. In fact, better than that, I was expected to produce a budget that actually took in a little bit more than you spent. That's called profit. But this budget deal is blowing our budget. It takes discretionary spending up $300 billion and only offsets it by 1/3. And by looking at numbers, it's pretty clear that Washington, D.C. doesn't have a revenue problem. You look at revenues as a percentage of GDP, but if you look at spending as a percentage of GDP, you start to see the real problem. D.C. doesn't have a revenue problem. D.C. doesn't need to ask for more money from the American people. Washington, D.C. has a spending problem. And controlling government spending is a big challenge. But it's one that we have to rise to meet. We must rise to the occasion, not retreat to trillion-dollar deficits. Now, funding our national defense is a fundamental requirement laid out in our Constitution. The men and women of our military, including our veterans, absolutely crucial. Funding for our community health centers, something I've been fighting hard for, important for our states. And in fact, earlier today, I supported a reasonable proposal to address both of these concerns without going rogue on spending. The question is, at what point is Congress going to look in the mirror and see that the real long-term certainty, the long-term sustainability of these programs that we all support is directly tied to fiscal responsibility? Even the former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, once said, and I quote, "The most significant threat to our national security is our debt." We've now crossed the $20 trillion debt threshold, and this bill simply accelerates that. I left the private sector to run for Congress and then came to the Senate to fight for more jobs and less government. I'll tell you what, I think if you looked in the dictionary for the term more government, you'd find this bill. This bill defines more government. Washington's broken budget process results in bad budget deals like this one. And we are continuing the cycle of irresponsible budgets, which creates more irresponsible budgets. It is an addiction to spending. It is an addiction to debt. But it doesn't have to be that way. Many of our states have figured that out. Many of our states aren't running deficits and large debts. The first bill, in fact, I introduced when I arrived to Congress is the Balanced Budget Accountability Act. It's not complicated. It simply says, if Congress can't pass a balanced budget, then we shouldn't get paid. That's the way it works in the real world. It ought to work the same way here. Because when Montanans look at their own budgets, whether it's in their families or in their small businesses, they have to make choices. When they take out a loan, they're expected to pay it back. They can't just borrow money from China like we do and kick the can down the road and expect that someday there will not be a day of reckoning. Raising the debt ceiling, growing spending, and spending away our children and grandchildren's future is irresponsible. You know, we talk about mortgaging our children's future. We've done that. I'll tell you what, with this bill here, we had to take out another credit card for our kids. This is not some glowing bipartisan moment. It is a classic example of disastrous policy making that's justified under the well-meaning pursuit of compromise. Make no mistake, this compromise is deeply irresponsible and one that the Senate should reject. I'm ready to work with anyone here to make the tough decisions necessary to get our budget and our fiscal house in order. Now think about this past year. We were able to cut through red tape, reducing the Federal Registry by over 30%. We were able to put qualified judges on the benches of our nation's courts, the most circuit judges in the first year of our presidency, dating back to 1891. We were able to pass a once-in-a-generation tax cut package for the American people. If we can do all of that, I think we can balance our budget here as well and put forward responsible fiscal leadership and management here in Washington, D.C. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's get to work. That is what we were elected to do. Until then, I will continue to stand, to continue to fight against this addiction of spending and debt of Washington, D.C. Thank you. I yield back my time.